Thank you so much. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of the Fort Lee Public Library's Diversity, Equity, Inclusion series. Tonight, I'm so proud to welcome you to the diversity panel of the Fort Lee community. My name is Jackie Lou Raia. I will be your moderator this evening. I am the president of Alexina Consulting and a great friend of Fort Lee, their library, and their mayor. So I'm so pleased that you all are here tonight. Just a couple of ground rules tonight, which you may or may not have seen in the chat. We are so pleased that you have all taken the time this evening to join us to help build empathy and understanding and advocacy within our community. I would also like to welcome the Fort Lee Public Library Board, as well as any other dignitaries that have been kind enough to join us tonight. So tonight, for the audience, please note that only the panelists and myself as the moderator will be on camera with audio capabilities. Everyone else will be off camera and muted for the entirety of the session. We do invite you, though, to put questions or any comments starting right now, if you'd like, into the chat, and we will be monitoring that. We will go into Q&A after I ask this great panel a couple of questions, and then we will go to you, the community, to address some of your concerns and questions, okay? We will make every effort to answer all of the questions that come through the chat, but please note that our time tonight is limited. But we will get to as many as we possibly can, taken in order. So if you have multiple questions, we're going to take question one of you and then go on to the next one. And if time permits, we will go back to your second question, just so that everyone gets a fair shot at asking the panelists questions. The session is being recorded, as you may see in your upper left-hand corner. So if there are any issues with that, I invite you to either stay off camera or remain anonymous throughout the session, okay? So with that being said, and remember to utilize the chat at any time that you would like, I would like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, and I will call on you. And if you could take a minute to tell us about you and what brings you to this very important table here tonight and what your areas of expertise are, right? So are we ready, panelists? Thumbs up? Okay, all right, here we go. Professor Ronald Chen, please introduce yourself.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here. My name is Ronald Chen. I am a law professor at Rutgers Law School, which normally means I work in Newark, although for reasons I don't have to explain, I actually haven't been in Newark for a few weeks, but I had my last contracts class of the semester today. Although I was born in Connecticut, I've lived in New Jersey since I was 5. I won't do the math for you, but that's a long, long time. So I really sort of consider myself a Jersey boy. I've been on the law faculty at Rutgers for a long time, but in between, I served in the cabinet of Governor John Corzine. I was the public advocate in New Jersey. Actually, I'm currently still the last public advocate of New Jersey, since the job hasn't been filled since then. And I litigate civil rights, individual rights cases. I'm on the national board of the American Civil Liberties Union, and I'm one of the general counsel of the ACLU, which, as you probably have heard of the ACLU, we try to champion the rights of individuals, free speech, equality, and dignity for all people.
Thank you, Professor Chen. Dr. Jinwon Kim, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jinwon Kim, and I am assistant professor of sociology at New York City College of Technology at CUNY. Thank you so much for the Fort Lee Public Library for organizing this panel. I'm so much honored to be here with you guys here and start conversation and discussion about such an important topic in current time. And about my work, my work focuses on urban sociology, globalization, race and ethnicity, Asian American studies, and consumption. And I'm currently working on book manuscript on Koreatown in Manhattan as a space for leisure, entertainment, and consumption. Yeah, that's it.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Kim. Rabbi Adina Lewitis, please introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. I'm Adina Lewitis. I'm the rabbi of Sha'ar, which is a Jewish community in northern New Jersey and New York City, as well as one with a North American-wide virtual presence now. We are a values-driven Jewish community that's oriented around the call to societal, environmental, and spiritual sustainability. We provide multiple gateways into Jewish life, exemplified by commitment to inclusiveness, diversity, innovation, scholarship, excellence, and collaboration. I've been honored in the past to serve additionally as the scholar in residence at Congregation B'nai Jeshurun in New York City, which is a synagogue renowned for its commitment to social justice and spiritual activism. I'm a member of the senior rabbinic faculty of the Shalom Hartman Institute and a member of the Board of Trustees of the Abraham Joshua Heschel School in New York City. I was honored at the beginning of my career to serve as the assistant dean of the rabbinical school at the Jewish Theological Seminary and to have founded a synagogue in Englewood, New Jersey, modeling shared leadership and collective communal responsibility. I have been engaged in interfaith and multicultural work since I was a seminary student over 30 years ago when I worked for the NCCJ, the National Conference of Christians and Jews, which is now, I believe, the National Council of Community and Justice. I enjoy speaking, teaching, and writing on topics such as Jewish identity, leadership, Jewish innovation, sexual and gender diversity, multi-faith and multi-heritage marriage and engagement, and contemporary Jewish spirituality. For almost 3 decades, I've been committed to building diverse and inclusive communities and bringing the spirit of innovation and creativity to contemporary Jewish life. I am extremely grateful and proud to be with you tonight. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. Next, Mr. Selaedin Maksut, please introduce yourself.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I agree with the Islamic greeting of peace, and the peace and blessings of God be upon you all. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited for this opportunity to be speaking with you all and talking about the diversity and equity and inclusion in our communities. A little bit about myself. I'm a 3rd generation Turkish American Muslim, born and raised here in New Jersey. I currently serve as the executive director of the Council on American-Islamic Relations New Jersey chapter. That is America's largest Muslim civil rights and advocacy group. We defend, educate, and empower American Muslims, those that face harassment or discrimination on the basis of race or religion. We also empower American Muslims to be engaged civically, and we educate those on the tradition of Islam and educating Muslims and others about their rights. Before my life at CARE, I was a student both in academia and traditional studies, studying the religion of Islam. My BA and my MA were in Islamic studies. I focused primarily on the intersection between Sufism, mystical Islam, if you will, and Islamic political theory. So this was my focus in my graduate school studies. A lot of it informs the way I carry on our CARE chapter, the Council on American-Islamic Relations, and our work, which is very much faith-based, faith-driven, grassroots activism that again inspires us to be involved and be active in our local communities. But I'm very looking forward to the conversations, and thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much. Dr. Noriko Matsumoto.
Yes, good evening, everyone. I would like to thank Foley Public Library for inviting me to participate in this panel. Many thanks to Chris, Sarah, and Jackie for organizing and moderating this event. And I'm Noriko Matsumoto. I teach in the Sociology Department and the Critical Race and Ethnic Studies program at the University of Vermont. I'm a sociologist and specialize in immigration, race, and ethnicity. And I teach courses on race and Asian American studies regularly at UVM. And I'm here today because I wrote my dissertation at the City University of New York on the East Asian immigrant communities in Foley. And this work was published as a book entitled Beyond the City and the Bridge by Rutgers University Press in 2018. The research documents immigrant life and the transformation of the American suburbs through a case study of Foley. I'm delighted to be here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we have none other than the Honorable Mayor Mark Sokolich. Mayor, please introduce yourself.
Thank you, Jackie. First and foremost, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for participating on this panel. It's so timely, and thank you to the Fort Lee Library for also putting this together. So welcome everybody to Fort Lee. It's not only about Fort Lee, but we are the host community, so thank you, and we really are indebted to you. My name is Mark Sokolich. I am currently in my 4th term serving as the mayor of the borough of Fort Lee. I'm a lifelong resident here. I've always taken tremendous pride from where it is that I come from. I enjoy tremendously the concept of community and the concept of volunteerism. But I think what's always kept me in politics and local government has been the ability to help. And it sounds corny, but you always want to be, and I've always wanted to be that go-to guy and be able to assist people in whatever problems that they might be facing. Here in Fort Lee, we're a very diverse community, all sorts of ethnicities and nationalities which have merged together. Thus far, I think where diversity, quite frankly, is one of our most important components of our community. I've always viewed the key, though, to making sure that we have a community that gets along is accessibility to me, and also equal treatment of the public. And I look forward to talking about the programs that we've put into place here in Fort Lee to make sure that that's promoted on a constant basis. So thank you again. Thank you to the library, and really, really excited because I really want to listen, and I'm looking forward to not only participating, but learning from each and every one of you. So thank you again.
Thank you so much, Mayor. I do believe we have a couple of people in the waiting room, so if someone could let them in, that would be wonderful. And last but not least, we have Lieutenant Gregory Williams, retired from the New Jersey State Police. Lieutenant, please introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jackie. Good evening, everyone. I am Gregory Williams, a retired lieutenant from the New Jersey State Police, 30 plus years of experience in serving with the State Police. Graduate of Fairleigh Dickinson University with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice. I'm a very proud United States military veteran, served in the United States Navy prior to becoming a trooper with the State Police. I was fortunate and blessed to have an experience to have a very diverse career with the New Jersey State Police. That experience also included serving a term as president for the New Jersey Association of School Resource Officers, based out of Fort Lee, currently serving on the advisory board. Post-retirement, I'm currently providing security with Edison Township School Board at Martin Luther King Elementary School in Edison. I presented hundreds of school resource officer programs in regards to cultural diversity. Back in 2015, I led a workshop on cultural diversity in education at the Bergen County Education Association's Human Relations Minority Involvement Committee's Diversity Workshop, was it called. And so I'm honored to be here with such distinguished members. Thank you so much, Jackie. And
All right, Lieutenant Williams, thank you so very much. So audience, as you can see, we have a powerhouse of panelists here, and we're going to not only learn so much, but be able to share so much tonight and really be able to elevate the diversity, equity, and inclusion within the Fort Lee community. So I say, let's get started. So question 1, and panelists, if you would take about 2 minutes to offer your responses to this question, I would appreciate it. So question number 1 is this: what is the biggest misconception about your culture and community today? And let me repeat that for our audience. What is the biggest misconception about your culture and your community today? So Professor Chen, let's start with you.
Well, I don't know if it's the biggest misconception or even that it's a misconception, but there is, if I'm for the moment representative of the Asian, particularly the Chinese community in New Jersey. There is a perception that has existed that I've perceived since I was a young boy growing up in New Jersey in the 1960s, that Asian Americans were separate and apart from everyone else because, in particular, they did not engage in the public civic life of our country. The perception was that they weren't interested, that they were focused on other things, that culturally engaging in civic activities and in particularly political activities was just not something that they were interested in or good at. I think that has been changing happily, but I mean, and not to toot my own horn, when I became the public advocate, I was the first Asian American member of a New Jersey governor's cabinet ever. I was, out of accuracy, I got that record by 2 minutes because the person behind me was the incoming Secretary of Transportation, Chris Kaluri, who's South Asian, and I just walked faster getting sworn in. But the fact that and that was in 2006. And since then, there have been many more Asian Americans even seeking elected office. Lieutenant Williams, you're working in Edison right now. I'm very good friends with June Choi, the former mayor of Edison. So it is changing, but the ability of the Asian community to have that type of conversations with communities in a platform that, at least up until recently, I thought Americans sort of had in common, is missing. Now, unfortunately, even that sort of that interaction among communities is being lost, and we're finding an inability of communities to even communicate with each other, even using a common vocabulary or a common acknowledged set of facts on which to agree or disagree. So I think it's particularly important that all our communities find the way their way to engage in that discussion, again, respectfully, honestly, and without the frankly fear and anger that seems to be animating so much of our conversation recently.
All right, Professor Chen, and hence that's why we're here tonight, right?
Exactly.
So thank you so very much. Dr. Kim, how about you?
Yeah, so one of the biggest understandings of a Korean community here in the United States is that Koreans are not really willing to mingle with others and community or assimilate into, so-called assimilate into American mainstream, as they, congregate in a small ethnic enclave, speak, their own language, and, speak their own language and maintain their own cultural values in America. But Koreans, just like many other immigrants, are willing to assimilate into American mainstream and have strong aspiration for assimilation, especially for their children's generation. But as just like many other immigrants experience, it's really hard, and they have a lot of obstacles and challenges to incorporate because of their language barrier and also various forms of discrimination that they experience on a daily basis.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Rabbi Louidis, how about you?
Thank you. The Jewish people are an incredibly diverse people, arguably more so than we've ever been in our 4,000 plus year history. There is a magnificently broad spectrum of beliefs and practices spanning from the most conservative to the most liberal that manifests itself through culture, religious observance and spirituality, and through demographics in terms of growing numbers of Jews of color, which is among the fastest growing demographic in the Jewish community, growing numbers of multi-faith and multi-heritage families, and of course, a sizable LGBTQ community that cuts across all segments of the Jewish people. This wondrous diversity which many of us see as our greatest strength, is often overlooked or simply unknown to people outside of the Jewish community. The most visible and oftentimes the most spoken about Jewish communities are those that seem to distinguish themselves and separate themselves through particular forms of dress or behavior, which are very different from the more normative expressions of 21st century American Jewish life. I'm referring to the ultra-Orthodox communities in such places as Brooklyn, Rockland County, Orange County, and Jersey City, where almost 1 year ago, it'll be 1 year ago on December 10th, there was a shooting at a kosher store, which claimed the lives of 3 Jewish civilians from that community. You know, when Oprah Winfrey did a piece on the Jewish community in the United States, she chose to spend time with a Hasidic family in Brooklyn because they seem more unusual, maybe even somewhat more mysterious. I said to someone close to Oprah that I would be more than willing to introduce her to the Jewish community through my eyes as a gay female rabbi, but apparently that wasn't as interesting. But aside from the limited picture that this focus can generate, sometimes there are dangerous misimpressions that get formed too. You know, in recent weeks, there have been very disturbing stories about mask burning and the defiance of social distancing rules by some in the Hasidic community in Brooklyn in reaction to the pandemic, stories which have brought, in my opinion, appropriate condemnation both from within and beyond the Jewish world. But it's important not to conclude from those actions that Jewish values are selfish or that Jews reject notions of social responsibility. The vast majority of Jews have a very deep commitment to public welfare and social justice, informed by our tradition, whose core mission is the healing and redemption, not just of Jews and Judaism, but of every human being, every living creature, and the planet itself. In fact, my colleague, Dr. Yehuda Kurtzer of the Shalom Hartman Institute, wrote a piece in The Atlantic about the Hasidic protests in Brooklyn, in which he argues that seeing the behavior of the Hasidic community as a rejection of American norms actually gets the story backwards. Their actions more truthfully reflect today's, I think, very deeply disturbing thinking in communities of all kinds across our country, that rules requiring personal sacrifice to advance the public good are a violation of civil liberties. Like so many others across our nation, the message that civil rights are more important than civic responsibilities, even when it comes to putting ourselves or others at risk, is what is so deeply discomforting today. And I think that reflects a major moral crisis in American citizenship at large. So the biggest misconception about the Hasidic Brooklyn protesters is that they're an exception to American civic values. In reality, I think they're an extreme example of the dangerous national trend that is seriously compromising our national unity at this very frightening and fragile moment.
Thank you so much, Rabbi. So, Mr. Maksut, how about you?
Yes. So the question is an important one, but I want to fine tune it just a bit if I can. And that's changing the word culture. When talking about Muslims and the religion of Islam, you have Muslims that span all the way from Morocco to the Balkans, to Yemen, to Malaysia and India, and even in Latin America, and here in America and in Europe as well. So although the culture may be shared, it's really it's the religion that is shared across the spectrum. So this is an important distinction I think it's important to make when talking about the Muslim world, because it's so diverse and so rich and so different everywhere you go. And it speaks much to what the rabbi was saying when speaking about the Jewish community and the diversity within the community. But to the question of misconceptions, I think when speaking about the religion of Islam, many come to mind. I think there are two things important to note here. One, the misconceptions that have carried over from the colonial legacy, from colonial Europe's occupation and expansion and oppression of much of the global South, if you will, right? Everything that's not Europe, the other, right? And then the second misconception, for that point being, Muslims were barbaric, Muslims are backwards, Muslims need to be taught how to be civilized, Muslims need to be given civilization, therefore we're here to save them from that. And then the second misconception, which we see today in the post 9/11 world, is that Muslims are now violent, that they're here to force religion down our throats, that we're here to convert everyone to Islam by the sword. When anyone that is can pick up the Quran will see that the religion of Islam is a religion that not only, as we hear oftentimes, teaches peace and harmony, but is a religion that obligates Muslims to be at the forefront of a lot of the issues that we see today in our world, whether it be gender equality, whether it be housing equality, or financial equality, or addressing issues in our local communities, Muslims today in America, at the very least, see themselves as combating a lot of these issues. So these are some of the ways in which we tackle misconceptions, but I realize I might have more time is up because only 2 minutes to talk about misconceptions of Islam might be a bit difficult. But yes, thank you.
I think we could give an evening to each of our speakers tonight. Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much. Dr. Matsumoto, how about you?
Yes, sure. So I will answer this question based on observation of the Asian communities in Foley and on the scholarship on Asian Americans more broadly. So there are many enduring stereotypes and misperceptions regarding Asian Americans that have changed little over time. And one major stereotype is the view of Asian Americans as prominently foreign. So it is true that today about half the Asian American population of the United States are foreign-born immigrants, but there are those Asians whose roots go back several generations. So some of these Asian people are as long established as some immigrant groups from Europe, and yet because of their physical appearance, Asians across America have continued to be seen as foreign. The implication being that they do not belong to the US, even if they were born and grew up here. And Asian Americans also tend to be viewed as a homogeneous group, again, due to their physical appearance. But in reality, Asian Americans are truly an internally diverse group. And this homogenization of Asian Americans has led to various misconceptions about them. For example, the view that Asian Americans are a successful minority group and that they do not experience racism. Now, data show that these assumptions are mistaken. Asian Americans, for example, are the most polarized of all racial groups in terms of the economic status, meaning that the socioeconomic gap within Asian Americans is actually wider than that for any other racial groups. And as for racism against Asians, during my research, the Asian Americans that I interviewed generally said they haven't experienced blatant racism in Foley. But they're aware that anti-Asian racism exists and that they could easily be subject to social hostility. And Asian people tend to feel alienated in places where there are few Asians. And this was often cited as one of the reasons why they chose to live in Foley. So this suggests that Asians live with a sense of fear of racism and have a desire to avoid it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mayor Sokolich.
Thank you,
How
Jackie.
about you?
Thank you. You know, the first part of the question about what the biggest misconception, and I could speak to Fort Lee because I live Fort Lee, is that we're a one ethnicity town. I mean, for the longest time, everyone always thought that the only folks that live here in the borough of Fort Lee are of Korean American descent. And that's not the case. When, 25, 30, 40 years ago, I think the perception is that the town was comprised predominantly of Jewish folks. And then there was, before that, it was Italian American. And before that, it was actually Irish going back 70, 80 years ago. But that's simply not true. Korean Americans play a huge role in our community. But we are comprised of many different ethnicities. And I think it's important that everybody know that it's not just dominated by one. Number one. Number two, and I think other speakers have touched upon it, at least with regard to Korean Americans and a lot of the other ethnicities in town, when I first became mayor, there was always the desire to want to participate. There was always the desire to want to be on a board. There was always the desire to want to volunteer. And then when you would hand out those positions, people were, for whatever reason, intimidated to accept them. They didn't feel comfortable with them. But I can tell you over the last decade that has changed dramatically. And here, and again, I could speak to the borough of Fort Lee, we now have many, many people of many different descents that serve on our planning board, that serve on our zoning board. There's nothing more intimidating to someone that does not have a command of the English language to walk into 309 Main Street, which is our borough hall, and not have any idea where to go, who to speak to, not know if the person they're speaking to is giving them the right answer. So that's why we try to, in each department, building, tax, finance, mayor's office, have someone that's multilingual, whether it's Russian, whether it's Korean American. People need to feel comfortable. And if they don't feel comfortable, they're going to feel slighted. And if they feel slighted, then truly you're not really a functioning community. At least this is from my perspective. And I will also add, the greatest success that I've had in being able to communicate with all groups is actually through the members of the clergy. And just by way of example, when this pandemic started, I started a WeChat with all the rabbis in town, the shuls, the Catholic churches, the Protestant churches, the Korean American reverends, so forth and so on. And I could tell you that's become our most effective tool, because religion actually plays a very important role in making sure that everyone feels comfortable, at least here in the borough of Fort Lee. So really, the biggest misconception is that we're dominated by one ethnicity. We're not, number one. And number two, it's not just talking about wanting to participate. There is a true sincerity by all the groups in this town to want to be involved, to want to run for office. We have 2 Korean American council people now, and there are others that want to participate. So that's really it. But I think we've seen through time, it's not just about saying it, it's also wanting to do it. And that's why we've been able to make what I believe is leaps and bounds over the last decade.
Yeah, Mayor, I just have to say your penetration into faith-based, I mean, where there is trust, there is comfort, and where there is comfort, there is engagement, right?
Oh,
So,
absolutely.
right on. Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much. Lieutenant Williams, how about you?
Well, several different things, but one thing, that the communities are violent, and that the people in the communities don't want to work, they want something for free. And I believe that our people, African-American people, are very, very motivated, very, enthused when given the opportunity. There's a lot of systemic imbalance that is dealt with in the communities. And that is why most of my career, I dedicated my time to things like youth leadership safety program, mentoring, and being an example for those communities. And so I'm very proud that I was able to do that. Born and raised in the city of Trenton, New Jersey, our capital city. A part of starting the Capital City Community Coalition, where we had 3 pastors. I picked 3 pastors from 3 different churches, and we formed a meeting, we met, and to this day, they're still working that Capital City Community Coalition, the 4 Cs in the city of Trenton. So I believe in leading by example, and that's what I've tried to do throughout my career.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Lieutenant. So, you bring us to the next question, and since you are on a roll, I'm just going to start with you again. So our second question, and I will repeat it for our audience, is this. Despite the international tensions between our countries of origin and social unrest in America, what can we do in Fort Lee and all communities to heal our historical wounds and misunderstandings? One more time. Despite the international tensions between our countries of origin and social unrest in America, what can we do in Fort Lee and all communities to heal our historical wounds and misunderstandings? Lieutenant, please continue.
Work on cultural climate. I've taught a lot of anti-bullying as well. And climate, the cultural climate is so very important. We want to bring about change in that cultural atmosphere. And Fort Lee is a very diverse community. I was up there weeks ago and actually ran into a young white man, and I was just start talking to him, and we were talking, and he was telling me about being on a soccer team. When he was on the soccer team, and they went to play in this particular city or town, and the coach from the other team was surprised because it was Fort Lee. He thought that the team would be all, white males, but it was a very diverse team. And so I found, as the mayor is saying, Fort Lee to be very diverse, as I've traveled up there for about the last 16, 17 years, very diverse. But cultural climate is so very important. And just opening up and befriending people. And I really love the atmosphere in Fort Lee. The cultural climate is good, but that's the important thing.
All right. Thank you so much. Dr. Matsumoto, how about you?
Yes, sure. So as an educator, I believe that an important instrument to overcome misunderstanding is knowledge and education. So topics of race, racism, or racial discrimination may make many people uncomfortable, but knowledge about society and history, for example, is very helpful for understanding a society and social relationships at the present. So here I'm considering an example of ethnic history. The history of minority groups in this country shows a long struggle, and yet little is taught about ethnic history in schools. And I say this based on my teaching experience because my students often mention how little they knew about racial minority groups in America until taking my course on race. And they also feel that they should have learned about such histories earlier in their lives. So the younger generation certainly learn about slavery and the civil rights movement in the education up to high school, but they generally do not seem to have the chance to learn about other aspects of minority experience. Another important perspective is that the visible social phenomena are products of social systems. So for example, while the public discourse tends to focus on immigration issues, there is less attention to the important role of immigration policy and the global economy shaping the trends of immigration. So when we think about contentious social issues, I think it is very important to consider the wider social context. And one way to promote overcoming misunderstanding is to have some opportunities in the community to learn about the kinds of experiences that racial minorities go through in America, both in the past and the present. And this can take place in schools, and participating in this kind of community panel discussion is another possible aspect of dialogue in this process.
So Dr. Matsumoto, are you saying that we're on the right track here in Fort Lee?
Yeah, yes.
All right. Excellent. Thank you. I knew we were. Mr. Maksut, how about you?
Absolutely. Very much in line with what's been said so far. When I think about this question, I think first and foremost, very famously, of a Quranic verse where God says in the Quran that he created humanity into nations and tribes so that they may come to know one another, so they may come to learn from one another. And this concept of learning from each other, right? We have various ethnic, racial, religious backgrounds, and people are also diverse in many other ways, economically and socially speaking. He's telling us in the Quran that he created us to come to learn and know from one another. This point of education is a reoccurring theme in the Holy Quran, right? And the way we interpret it is that education, for the sake of God, is a form of worship, right? Many people know that worship, Muslims pray 5 times a day, but prayer and worshiping God is much more than rituals. It is to devote one's life to understanding the world around you, right? And this is the Muslim conception of what education and what devoting one's life to, righteousness is, right? And then secondly, a very famous narration by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says that he came to this earth to perfect character. He came to this earth to perfect human character. And what we see over and over again in his tradition is that perfect character is character that respects your neighbor, respects the elderly, respects parents, respects strangers, right? There is a narration where he was sitting with friends and in front of them, a funeral procession passes by, and the Prophet stands up out of respect for the funeral. And when the funeral passes and leaves, he sits back down, and his companions turn to him and say, "Oh, Prophet of God, why did you stand up for that funeral? Did you know that that man was Jewish?" And the Prophet turned to his companions and said, "How can you say that? Is he not a soul?" So he expresses the compassion, and he expresses that no matter if you are Jewish, Christian, Muslim, atheist, Buddhist, you deserve respect. You deserve compassion. And this is the teachings of the Prophet, to have proper etiquette, proper manners, and the best character you possibly can. Education and compassion, that's your answer.
That's wonderful. Open hearts and open minds and your willingness to learn, critically important. Thank you so much. Rabbi Luitis, how about you?
Thanks very much. In response to your question, I guess having listened to me speak a little bit, you can probably tell that my country of origin is about 350 miles north of here, known as Canada. But I'm also a proud American as well. I want to pick up where I left off in my first response. For me, the big question is, how do we as Americans recover the moral vocabulary with which to write the story of American healing and renewal in Fort Lee and in every other setting in our country? And I think the answer begins in part by recognizing that today, as I tried to suggest, the language of civic responsibility seems to have shifted from a sense of obligation to the language of rights. You know, in Jewish tradition, our core sacred myth, meaning a story that may or may not be historically accurate, but that for us contains deep truths, is how we stood at Sinai, not as individuals, but as a people, as a collective, and received the Torah as a set of responsibilities to help not just define or identify us as a community, but to build fellowship and to provide concrete expressions of our values and our faith in and loyalty to the divine, in order to bring about a vision of a holy society for all, and to share in illuminating and protecting that vision for all of humanity. As a rabbi, I work very hard. I'm committed to working hard each and every day to teach and model with my community these deep lessons of social obligation and the value of collective responsibility. And I think it's important for all of us to engage deeply with these themes. I believe that reviving a public discourse of obligation is key to building a more just and robust American democracy in which everyone feels a sense of belonging and a sense of safety, and to which we can share a broad commitment. And in order to do that, I think there are a few themes that are worth elevating. One being gratitude. Here we are just a few days after Thanksgiving. I think it's really important to acknowledge the many blessings that this country has graced us with: freedom, safety, education, opportunity. Today is At Giving Tuesday, a day in which we recognize our blessings by giving back to others. I think gratitude is an important path towards a deeper understanding of collective responsibility. I also think it's important to look forward and not so much backward, investing our time and efforts and even our emotions in the future, in the promise of what tomorrow can look like. We'll do more to cultivate healthy and productive bonds between us all, because we all have a stake in what's to come. Our pasts may be different, and we may cherish and revere them. Our journeys to this place may have taken different twists and turns, but if we can focus on the path that we're walking together now, and on all the possibilities that are yet to come that will enhance all of our lives, we may find ourselves in a more productive conversation with each other. I think living from hope is critical. Living from fear can be very dangerous. We make much better choices when we make them from hope than when we make them from fear. I also think that obligations lead to rights, and not so much the other way around. We know that being a member of society comes with both responsibilities and benefits, with obligations and rights. If we share in the obligations, we'll also be able to share in those rights. It's not a zero-sum proposition. If one person attains their rights, it doesn't mean that another can't. We tend to open our conversations about rights and then talk about the obligations that are necessary to secure them. But as my colleague, Dr. Kurtzer, suggested, maybe if we open our conversations about shared commitments to one another, the rights that we all seek will also flow more naturally and reliably. And when we focus the conversation starting out on rights, we tend to be advocating only for ourselves, where some will benefit, but many more will continue to suffer. But if we focus the conversation right from the outset on obligations and a sense of collective enterprise, we end up advocating for each other. And more likely we will be to secure collective benefits and build goodwill. And not just that, but also trust. Trust is key, I think, for collective well-being. There have been moments in our history when this kind of discourse was deemed powerful and meaningful, like when John F. Kennedy in his 1961 inaugural address asked that iconic question: ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. So I'm going to end where I began and share just the words of a great Jewish teacher, the late Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, whose final book before he died just under a month ago was called Morality: Restoring the Common Good in Divided Times. He said, societal freedom cannot be sustained by market economics and liberal democratic politics alone. It needs a third element: morality, a concern for the welfare of others, an active commitment to justice and compassion, a willingness to ask not just what's good for me, but what's good for all of us together. It's not about us. Sorry, it is all about us, not me. It's about we, not I.
Thank you, Rabbi. So you remind me that everyone keeps saying we are all in this together. Thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Dr. Kim.
Yes, so I don't really find any serious recent international tensions between the US and South Korea, but livelihood of Koreans and Korean Americans in the United States have shaped by geopolitics in East Asia and also in the United States. During this pandemic, increasing tension between China and the United States, China and the US, and the political rhetoric reinforced by politicians in both continents have negative impact on the livelihood of Asians in general, not only Chinese, but also other East Asians. Many Asian Americans, definitely report that they have experienced a lot of COVID-19 related racism, including myself. I'm based in New York City, Queens, but I have experienced racist incident 3 times since the pandemic personally. So that's there. But at the same time, I find that there is no clear answer to hear that issue in our community. But it's really important for us to have and start conversation about this issue and build solidarity for minority groups to bridge the gap between diverse communities. People do not really have experience to interact with others, but they do develop imagined racial stereotypes without having close connection with other people. So having such a room and space for people to start conversation and discussion would be really good start to talk about, to hear these points, I think.
All right. Excellent. Thank you so much, Dr. Kim. So again, here we are tonight. So we're on our way. So thank you so very much. Professor Chen, how about you?
Well, I don't know how to. First, let me associate myself with everything that all the speakers have said thus far on this issue. I guess first talking about, well, not my country of origin, but of my heritage. Maybe it's I'll pick up a little on something that Dr. Matsumoto said. This concept of combating the image of permanent being a permanent foreigner. I mean, I was born here. Now, I would say I have not really myself suffered from what I would call horrible acts of discrimination or racism. Occasionally, I laugh at it. Someone compliments me by saying how well I learned to speak English, which is, and I thank them. And when I tell them it was from the Berkeley Heights school system, it was. But in other words, what I'm referring to is the assumption, the immediate assumption that I'm mainly defined and my outlook is mainly defined by my cultural heritage, which frankly, it is not right now. I'll tell you personally, I've got some real disagreements with what the Chinese government is doing, as maybe do a lot of us, but I would resist, of course, being defined by what the Chinese government is doing, because I have essentially no more to do with it than anyone else in this country. But maybe going another thing, and I don't mean to be depressing at all, but in asking what can we do, let's face it, and this is the depressing part of it. The level of our national conversation and discourse lately has just been beyond depressing. It has deteriorated to a horrible extent. As a lawyer, I'm professionally trained to believe that one common thread that should animate all Americans is the belief in the rule of law, that equality before the law, that no one is, that it is an equalizing and inclusive force, and even that assumption's been taking some hits recently. But I'm not so professionally arrogant to think that that's the only way we can achieve it. And I think right now, hopefully this is not ambitious enough, the way to restore our ability to have a conversation with each other is at the community level. If I could come up with the secret of finding how to restore our ability to have a discourse at the national level, I should claim the Nobel Peace Prize. I don't have that answer. But at the community level, you can find some activity, some common thread, because you're spending your daily lives with each other. It could be anything. It could be in the arts, music, culture. Usually something involving our children is usually something that always has some common thread in that will absolutely break down the barriers. Just find something in common to talk to each other about, in which you have a common vocabulary. And then once you've developed that ability to talk to each other on something, then maybe you can expand it. But again, I think this is best done at the community level. It is going to take longer to do it this way, but that's the way that I think we have to restore our ability to have conversations between communities. It is easier for people to discover or remind each other that even though we have different ethnic, religious, racial heritages, that there are a lot of common threads, and there is nothing to fear. Picking up on what I think Dr. Matsumoto said about being deemed permanently foreign. For Asian Americans, very often amongst the majority culture, it's language. For some reason, they are put off, sometimes fearful of the language. I've got to admit, about 20 years ago, I took an ACLU case involving a municipality in Bergen County. Mayor Sokolich, it was not Fort Lee. It was a neighboring municipality that, frankly, I think out of fear adopted an English-only ordinance.
I know the case.
Sign that had a big effect on the Korean American business population in the center city. I don't think it was actually done out of malice, but it was basically done out of fear that there was going to be this cultural takeover. And so, I mean, I had a little piece of it, but it was mainly litigated by others. And of course, the legal system eventually dealt with that. But there are other ways, I think, to discover that the differences that do remain, the cultural distinctions that remain amongst us, need not be the subject of such fear. But again, I think that is best learned at the community level, rather than having people from on high, certainly these days not from Washington, trying to teach us this lesson. These are lessons, frankly. Leadership on this is going to come much more from Mayor Sokolich than from the President-elect Joe Biden. I pick on him because I'll confess I voted for him, so it's not as if I'm picking on him. But I think that is the way we're going to restore our ability, our sense of collective community.
Well, thank you, Professor. So I think Professor has just opened the floor to you. So what can we do as a community?
I will just on the one thought from the professor, I agreed with everything. These answers are fantastic. And I'm taking notes because I told you I want this to be a learning experience for me. But a lot comes down to local level, even fighting the pandemic. When Governor Murphy issues these executive orders, pardon my language, but if it ain't me and us enforcing it and promoting it and educating it, it's not getting done. And, another point that was made, through kids comes unity. There is no question about it. You can't place enough weight on activities such as youth sports. And I don't mean to get too parochial, but I know Fort Lee. And for example, I am a firm believer that to heal wounds, to bring people together, in order to do that, you need to encourage and want to enjoy the celebration of everyone's background and ethnicities. And examples of that, the Fort Lee Library, several years ago, started a program on the celebration of people of Asian heritage, Korean American heritage. What started off with a few hundred people in the lower level of the library turns into thousands attending at our community center. And I will tell you, was not all Asian Americans attending. It was Caucasians. It was people from all different backgrounds. And it was a beautiful thing to see. Events like that bring communities together when you understand the people that you live with. We are opening a new theater here in Fort Lee. It was supposed to open in October. Because of the pandemic, like everything else, everything has been delayed. Our first event is going to be a 3-day Korean American Film Festival. The one after that's going to be Jewish American Film Festival. We're looking to celebrate and educate and let everybody in the world know about who they're living with, because the more they know about their neighbor, the better we all get along. Monuments, people have accused me of being monument crazy. But when the Korean American community wanted a Comfort Woman Memorial, which by the way, was a bit controversial, we did it. But we did it and we explained that if there are other groups that have something that they want to celebrate, we're going to find room for them also, because everyone should have a voice. And I don't mean to be too parochial, but I left the VFW today, or Veterans of Foreign Affairs. And I can't tell you what a beautiful mix of individuals. I mean, the number was low because of the restrictions from COVID, but it just seems that everybody has this unified goal to make sure that we don't forget our veterans, and everyone of all descents, we're all participating. So I do believe that unity comes from the celebration of each other's backgrounds and ethnicities. That's at least what we try to promote here. And just one final thought. I think Fort Lee has made its greatest strides when we've had our greatest problems and how we react to them. A lot of the things that I'm saying, any mayor with half a brain should be able to figure it out, that, hey, celebrate who you live with and the backgrounds of everybody and educate everyone. And you should have a community that's in harmony. But I think when we've had bad situations in Fort Lee, and I'll give you the example, several years ago, I was in the middle of a speech for Greek Independence Day, 400 or 500 people dead in the middle of that speech. The police chief waved me over, need to speak to you right away. I ended the speech. I went outside. The night before, we inadvertently locked kids in a paddy wagon. We broke up a party, and these kids were left overnight in this wagon. Overnight. You think it's crazy, but that's how it happened. One cop thought the other one emptied the wagon. They didn't. They were discovered the next day, 12 hours later, if you could believe it. And wouldn't you know that 5 or 6 of those children were of Korean American descent? And I viewed that event to be potentially one of the worst possible events that can happen in the borough of Fort Lee, because that had prejudice written all over it. And the very next morning, every single leader of every Korean American organization, the parents of all of those kids, were brought to my office. There were about 50 of us in the room, no police, just me. And we talked it out and explained that, look, this is who was picked up. There was no malfeasance involved. Yes, it was gross negligence. And yes, we paid consequence for it. But if that wasn't addressed immediately, if that wasn't done the next morning, if that was something to just push under the rug, I think the topic tonight would be a little different. And that would be how Fort Lee has failed in its mission. So I guess it's responsiveness, it's celebrating each other's backgrounds, and it's encouraging people to engage in that celebration. That's all I got.
Oh, well, no, it's not, Mayor, because I actually would like for you to comment on this. And this came up in our part 1 a couple of weeks ago, and it has come up again. Fort Lee and its community and surrounding communities are certainly people of action. The activities that you have engaged in, the projects that you have done as a community to engage everyone is remarkable. The question is, though, if you have community members who want to get involved in helping you, helping the library, helping key decision makers in your community to help create events and things of the like, is there a committee that they would be able to join?
There is. Now, and it's not a committee to create events, but you would talk to someone. First of all, I pride myself on being incredibly accessible. My cell phone is published the borough administrator, there are several different people and organizations that anyone can go to for purposes of starting. For example, we just had a sister city celebration with a city in Korea just last week. We did it actually live on Facebook, where we each signed each other's proclamation. That was something that was put together by a local Korean American resident. She brought the idea. It's great. We encouraged it. We fulfilled it. But all doors are open in Fort Lee. The idea here is to keep everybody super busy. The idea here is to have as many events as possible. And when we have them, we encourage everybody to participate. You know, from our tree lighting, which was 50 kids and a Charlie Brown Christmas tree 10 years ago, has now morphed into an event that has over 5,000 people at it. So in Fort Lee, we encourage folks to come up with these ideas. Where do they go? They either email me or they email, for example, if it's an environmental initiative, we have an environmental commission. If it's a library initiative, it would be me, or more likely it would be Chris. The single most important characteristic to work in the borough of Fort Lee, at least while I'm here, is to be open, available, and always responsive to any suggestions people have.
All right, so they're going to go right to you. Excellent, excellent. Okay, so we're going to go to the Q&A. We have some nice questions here. So the first one is for Professor Chen. So our co-op is getting an infusion of Asian Americans, Chinese, Korean, Taiwanese, etc., who tend not to engage with neighbors. How can our community involve them in our self-government, for example, the board or volunteer committees?
That's picking up on the issue I discussed earlier, at least the perception that Asian Americans don't engage in sort of collective governance, whether private or on a larger level. You know, this is not easy. I think it's a little what I said before. You have to develop their trust that these processes really work and are important to them. It's not something, obviously, I'm a lawyer. My profession is based on the feeling that these processes are important. For some, particularly for some who are just coming from Asian cultures, they may not have quite the same background for it. So I think you do what I suggested before. You first engage them on something that they do realize is important, and then show them that the way to promote those interests is perhaps through engaging in some civic participation, including starting at the co-op board level at a relatively local level. It is not going to happen overnight. There are some, I will admit this, having lived through it for all my life, there are a few cultural barriers that you do have to overcome. This is not purely, this is not something really to ascribe fault to, but there are some differences in outlooks and attitudes and how participation in internal self-governance at whatever level, how meaningful that is in someone's life. But I can believe it's like you engage with anyone. You first find something in common, and then when they begin to realize that something that is important to them will be resolved through these processes, then they will join naturally. Okay. At least that is my hope. Okay. We've been a number of us have been trying for many years to try to activate the Asian American community at the state level in New Jersey. Not good, but it started out a little rough. It didn't seem that they were particularly interested, but it is growing markedly. We now have Asian Americans in the state legislature and as cabinet officers, as elected officials, in mayors. One day, who knows, maybe even a governor or more than that. But it does start at things like the school board or a co-op board.
Okay, that's great. In answer to that as well, what I hear you saying is share knowledge and let them know the impact. And this is true for anyone in the community. Yeah. As a single person, the impact that you can have on other people's lives might be just that trigger to allow you to be more comfortable in joining volunteer groups and committees. So thank you very much. The next question is from the Fort Lee Library's very own board, Dr. Michael Sharp. And it's a two-part question actually. He would like to know how you as panelists reacted to or are reacting to Black Lives Matter, and how can Blacks be better included? So who would like to go first? A show of hands. Yes, Lieutenant.
Okay. I believe that Black Lives Matter sometimes, lots of the time, gets a bad rap, but I believe that Black lives do matter, and that speaking up as a Black man is very important. And so I also have worked with the National Stop the Violence Alliance down in Camden, New Jersey. We've mentored, I've gone to Jamaica with these young men, and to Canada. But I definitely believe that Black Lives Matter is important, because Black lives do matter. Police lives matter as well. So I've been in both of those areas.
So very important that you should say that. So thank you so much. Rabbi, did I see your hand up?
Yes, hi. I just wanted to say that our community, we stand in deep solidarity with those who work for racial justice and the dismantling of the systemic structures that continue to impede the promise of justice and equality and freedom that this country stands for. And we've also actually felt both comfortable and appropriate in reaching out to process what have from time to time been uncomfortable moments in that solidarity, in terms of some expressions of anti-Semitic remarks that have emerged from within that very important relationship. And we've addressed it precisely so that we don't walk away from the most urgent work that I think is facing our country right now in terms of the work for racial justice. And I would just repeat what I said earlier, which I think is unknown to many people, that one of the fastest demographics growing in the Jewish community is the community of Jews of color. And so that's an additional reason why I think it's so important to declare our absolute commitment to understanding and to working for the cause of racial justice now.
Okay, thank you so much. Yes, Mr. Maksut.
Thank you. It's an important question, and the topic is very important, especially to Muslims in New Jersey and our office in particular, the Care New Jersey office. I will say a few things if I can. Racism, at least in the Islamic tradition, is believed to be an offense to God before it is an offense to his creation. It is an insult to God before it is an insult to his creation. And there's a very famous narration by the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, where he says that an Arab is not superior to a non-Arab, and a non-Arab is not superior to an Arab. And then he continued, and he said, a white man is not superior to a black man, and a black man is not superior to a white man. Very explicit. There's no gray area in this. Racism is absolutely abhorrent, right? And our office has worked hard in 2020 to address the issue of racism in our own communities, because Muslims are also guilty of this. You know, the Islamic tradition is what we adhere to, but Muslims are also need to work on these issues. So we actually ended up compiling a list of over, I believe, 50 mosques across the state that signed to a commitment to do better, right? To reach out to our Black brothers and sisters in local communities and to be a resource to them and to provide a platform for them so that they may be involved in our activities, so that we can learn from them and they can learn from us, and we can have a channel of communication. Black Lives Matter, absolutely. Absolutely, BLM, absolutely. This is an integral part of our teachings, right? You cannot separate the equality from the tradition of Islam. This is across the board. There's no gray area in this. but absolutely an important topic, one that our office works hard to champion racial and religious equality across the board. But yeah.
Thank you very much. Yes, Dr. Kim.
I do definitely support the Black Lives Matter movement, but I have to tell you guys that my community, particularly Korean American, Korean immigrant community, is so much divided on that issue. I think that it's really important for us to admit what is going on in our community, because I think it's a really, really sensitive topic for a lot of Korean immigrants who experienced, Los Angeles riots, as well as, Black boycott against Korean merchant in urban America back in 1990s. So, and also I do see a lot of, generational difference on the topic as well. So, but still there is always a concern and voices out there in my community that we do really have to think about racial justice for other ethnic groups and racial and ethnic groups as well. So you know that through COVID-19 pandemic, you became, as Asian Americans, Asian immigrants, you became victim of racism, just like other Black folks experience on a daily basis, right? So there is a lot of voices out there, but still there are a lot of things, there are a long way for us to go, especially in Korean American community. I know that could be a little more controversial, but I think that's really important to think about what is going on in our community more critically and start conversation from there.
I could,
Thank you. Thank you.
yeah, you notice I've changed my virtual background because in order to make a point, and I sort of want to try to make an unequivocal statement. I think it is very important for those of us in the Asian and Asian American community to be in complete solidarity with our African American neighbors on this issue, and I mean, this is not a competition, certainly, about who has suffered the more invidious or harmful types of discrimination. What happened last spring and what has been happening is just so beyond any need to distinguish. And I think it is just a matter of, frankly, of basic human principles that we must be unequivocal in our statement that this situation cannot continue, and we must change it. And it will very quickly redound to our own benefit as well, but not just because of this. It's just the scenes that we saw are, frankly, I've seen it. I mean, my law students, Rutgers Law School has a large African American population. They were emotionally seared, and you would think that law students they're fairly resilient. And the dean, I think quite rightfully, just said, we're going to not cancel final exams. We're going to pass a basis because it's just what that community has gone through and was gone through for so many years. It's just something that I think calls for all of support, and hopefully that when it comes time for the Asian American community, if need be, to point out something that they will that they have suffered, they will realize that there's only strength in solidarity in something like this.
So Professor Chen, actually, this is a nice lead into the next question. One of our viewers would like to know if you feel that New Jersey could work to create a more just society for its diverse community if the office of public advocate is restored. And what do you think has been the consequences of a decade without the office of the public advocate?
I pledge whoever that asked, I did not plant this question. Obviously, I'm partial. I thought that office, which has a long and very I think happy history in New Jersey, trying to be a voice for those who otherwise might not have a voice was very positive. I mean, what can I say? The political ebb and flow is what it is. It existed for many years, then it was eliminated, then it was restored, and I let it, and now it was eliminated again. You know, whether it's some office like that or some construct like that, I obviously committed 4 years of my life to the proposition that it is helpful if government itself provides a voice, and a voice with teeth. Of course, everyone was, the fear amongst my fellow members of the governor's cabinet is that I would sue them, which I had the power to do. I could have even sued the governor, which I didn't do, but every so often it made for uncomfortable cabinet meetings, because that's one thing, at least in America at the time, people feared. The power of law and litigation was something that people respected. Maybe it doesn't have to be that mechanism. There could be another mechanism by which government at least lets communities who otherwise feel disenfranchised or segments of the public, that they have someone in their corner. But I obviously, I do think it is very important, and I hope that there comes a time when the situation will allow the restoration of some function like that. I'm not wedded to any particular model, although I think the model of the public advocate, I mean, it was described as a unique model to show that otherwise disaffected, disenfranchised communities were empowered.
Okay, thank you so much. So this is does not necessarily have to be Fort Lee specific, because certainly does exist in other areas. But the question is, most of the township's official communications is only in English. Is there any plan to offer communications in major second languages such as Spanish and Korean, or other languages that are prominent in that particular community?
I mean, I could respond to that. That's one of those examples, Jackie, that if you're not sensitized enough to the people that you represent, and you don't recognize that there's a language barrier and you can't get the word out there in the language that they understand, that goes into the category of driving those folks away, of them not wanting to participate, of them feeling like, well, you know, we didn't even get the COVID notice in the language that we speak. Why should we want to participate in this community? So as important as the language is, the COVID rules, and whatever message you're sending, whether it's in Korean American, we used to do it in Russian and Korean American, we did it in Spanish. It's important because it also sends a message that you give a crap, part of my language. It's critical, and I think it is a huge, huge misstep by a local municipality if they don't put it out in the languages that are predominant in their community. They have to.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much. So I knew tonight was going to just whiz right by, and certainly it has. It's 8:21 right now. And I would like to go to the third and final question, just so we can wrap up this evening and respect everyone's time to continue on with their evenings after this session. So I would like to ask the panelists this question, and I do apologize that we weren't able to get to all of the questions, but certainly the conversation was very robust, and I will say that we will try to get all of these comments and questions to whoever they were sent to, or if they were general statements, try to get some response from the panelists, okay, at a later time, and share it with the person asking the questions. But here's my final question to the panel. Based on your experience and participation here tonight, what are your closing remarks? So I'm going to go back to my order, and if you could please take about 45 seconds to tie up, I would really appreciate it for each panelist. So Professor Chen, what say you?
You know, I don't know if I can add too much, so I'll just return to the theme that I've been trying to emphasize. True healing, which is what this event was trying to foster, really begins at the community. this is where our road to healing on the national level begins. So I just hope everyone will take advantage of that opportunity to discover those channels of common interest, common language, common understanding, and then build from there. And then build out to those areas. And inevitably, I'm sure Mayor Sokolich can tell us, there are areas in which neighbors are going to disagree. But at least at that point, you will have found a basis on which to frame that disagreement in the context of a larger goal. So that's why I think it's events like this that are going to generate the solution more so than any larger, grander project that we might envision.
All right, thank you so much, Professor. Dr. Kim.
Yeah, so I found through this conversation tonight, I found two overarching themes from other panelists, education and conversation. I think this was really good opportunity personally and also as a community to get together and start those conversations and for the future. So that's the final remark, and that's kind of a self-reflection about myself. Thinking about my own community and also relationship with other communities. So, and I'm glad that I'm glad I'm here and start conversation with diverse communities in New Jersey and also in other parts of the United States.
All right, thank you so much, Dr. Kim. Rabbi Luitis, how about you?
Thanks. A common refrain in Jewish conversations around diversity is the belief that all human beings are created in the image of the divine. But it was Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel who expanded this teaching when he said, people aren't created in the image of the divine, people are the image of the divine. And in that powerful shift, Rabbi Heschel sharpened the way we're meant to look at each other and behold each other, not as reflections of holiness, but as holiness itself. And I think tonight has helped me understand even more deeply that every interaction that I have with another human being, be it with somebody in my community or somebody in another faith community or in another ethnic community, be it with a close friend or a complete stranger, with a woman of power, or perhaps someone who's destitute and homeless, to understand that in each of those interactions, with any of those people, that I am interacting with the divine, with the source of life, with the one that unites us. And that reminds me of the awesome responsibilities and opportunities for healing and redemption that I hold in my hands hundreds of moments every single day, including this one and the many that we've spent together this evening. I go back to the story of Sinai, where over 600,000 Israelites were said to stand at the foot of a mountain, as well as multitudes of others who joined in the Exodus. A scenario which brings similar gatherings of diverse voices and people is one that is acknowledged with a special blessing in our tradition, a blessing that acknowledges the breadth and diversity of humanity. The blessing is one that refers to the Holy One as Chacham Harazim, the one who knows secrets. It's a blessing that we make over pluralism and diversity, over the different sources of knowledge and understanding and experience that keep us on one level unknowable fully to one another, but if we look hard enough, infinitely recognizable to one another, which is a discovery that I feel tonight has brought out. It's a blessing when we feel overwhelmed by the richness and diversity that animates our communities and our country. So here in this virtual room, beholding the wisdom and the dedication amongst the speakers tonight, I feel deeply moved and I feel deeply inspired. And I think more importantly, I feel deeply accountable to you all and to all that you've taught me tonight. So in the presence of all of you and all those who have gathered with us in this virtual room, I just close with these words of blessings. Baruch Chacham Harazim. Blessed is the wise one of secrets, of the mysteries that keep us curious and interested in one another, that bring us together to jointly and to respectfully unfold our treasures that will help to reweave the fabric of our human lives and heal our still broken world.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Rabbi. Mr. Maksut, please.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you so much to the Fort Lee community for hosting this forum. I think these opportunities for communication, the importance of them cannot be underestimated, right? So these gatherings are blessed, and thank you all so much for reaching out to all of us and hosting us. A practical teaching and a quick story that I wanted to impart, and then I'll leave it at that. There was a Bedouin man who had a camel, and he left it. He did not tie his camel. And the prophet turned to him and said, "Why don't you tie your camel down? It's going to run away." And the man turned to the prophet and said, I put my trust in God, as if his trust in God is sufficient to keep the camel from walking away. The prophet turned to the men and said, tie your camel first, and then put your trust in God. A very practical point. You have to physically take action before you can just have faith and, have faith in God and trust in God, or just speak words, right? There's action, and then there are words, right? We speak and we have faith, and we have trust in the world around us, but we have to actually physically do something first, right? Tie our camel, meet your neighbor, physically knock on his door and say, here's a pie I made, take action, right? Talk to people, have conversations, do something physical. And it's not just about posting on Facebook or on Twitter, but it's about taking that physical step to meet someone new. That's what our tradition teaches. That's what I hope I have imparted on some people today. Once again, thank you so much. And with that, I'll end. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. May the peace and blessings of God be upon you all.
Thank you so very much. That was wonderful. Dr. Matsumoto.
Yes,
Final
so
words.
yes, thank you. So this was great learning experience for me, and I do appreciate the thoughts and insights that the people who participated in this panel shared. And I think that our discussion today really provided us the opportunity for all of us to think through the critical issues of our time. And I hope that the people of Foley will continue discussions. And I think in general that people in Foley value diversity, but as pointed out, diversity can pose a challenge to community for sure. So as pointed out by other panelists, I do believe and I agree that when people with different viewpoints come together and try to have honest discussion with each other, then I think it can provide a pathway to mutual understanding. So that's very important to have conversation, discussion. And I think it's okay for the community not to solve the issue today or tomorrow, but it is important to have the dialogue to begin with. And I think it's also very important for people to be open-minded, even if you disagree with other views, which is fine, but I think it's very important to be open-minded. And in fact, we can actually learn and gain knowledge from learning other people's perspectives that are not our own. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Doctor. Mayor, what are your closing remarks?
I cannot thank everyone enough. Thank you so much for this wealth of knowledge. It's all about the actions that we do. And believe it or not, this very panel is now one of the things in our toolbox out there to get out to the public and say, look, we're talking about it. We're bringing these issues to the forefront. We're comparing notes and we're trying to come up with the best policies and ideas that we can. And I think this is one of those important steps to make everybody feel in our community that we're all working towards the same goal. And it's interesting, when I first became mayor, if I would try to do something that would bring folks together, I would always get at the end of the event, wow, that was great. Oh my gosh, what a great, oh, this was fantastic. And some of them stunk. They weren't publicized enough. They weren't that effective. But as time went on, those same groups started to feel comfortable to disagree and to express their opinion, their criticism. They weren't intimidated about speaking. And this goes to what the professor said earlier about, once people start to feel comfortable about expressing where they disagree, not only where they agree, but where they disagree, and make suggestions and say, what about this? What about that? What about doing it differently? Then I think you've really made strides, because now people have an arena, they have an avenue, they have an outlet to go to speak, and they're comfortable to speak up. And I think then you're on the way to arriving to having a diverse community with equal opportunity. And just from a personal note, I think as a result of the last 4 years, we have a lot of work to do, and it's important at the local level to make sure that American dream and everybody with equal opportunity, or at least our strides to get there, is not completely lost. And I want to just thank everybody for, really educating me here. I took copious notes, and I'm hopeful to implement many of the ideas that you've given me tonight. So thank you all. And we all have to start to love each other more. And I think we're going to get through it. I really do. Thank you. Thank you, folks.
Thank you so much, Mayor. So, Lieutenant, closing remarks, please.
Yes, thank you so much, Jackie. Very, very positive. Considering the pandemic and all that we've all been going through, this interaction with diversity is just so inspiring to me. Having worked with the imams and the rabbis and the reverends throughout my 3-decade career in law enforcement, having been blessed with such a great diverse career, I believe in sharing, and I think that getting together like this diverse group is so very important. And I want to share. I'm still available too, and I can be reached, my contact information, but I really, really enjoyed this, and I am so honored to be with such a distinguished panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. So this brings us to the end. Yes, Mayor.
Oh, Jackie, I'm so sorry to be rude. When you're mayor, you get to be rude a little bit, and when you're in your hometown, I'm sorry. I also just wanted to bring to everyone's attention, and we're working on it. The pandemic has slowed it down, but we're very proud that we will soon announce a diversity task force here in the borough of Fort Lee, so that all of our policies are reviewed to make sure everybody's got a fair shot. I can't catch everything. The people that are in place can't catch everything. And of course, that panel, that commission would be a proper reflection of the diversity and the demographic in Fort Lee. We're hopeful that that's also going to be a step. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention. We're trying, and we just want to make sure everybody's got a fair shot here and everybody's comfortable raising their families, living and working here. And we think that commission will be very helpful in that regard. Pardon the interruption.
That's okay, Mayor, because I'm looking at all the comments and that's what your residents want. And I think it's a great idea for all communities to build.
They're going to get it.
So that the community can really take part. I thank you all. You have been amazing panelists. I've learned so much from you. I hope that our audience shares in this sentiment. Thank you for your time and your absolute talent and knowledge. Truly, truly appreciate this. I wanted to announce on behalf of the library that there will be an author visit that is coming up on January 14th at 7 o'clock. And they're doing this in collaboration with a number of other libraries. And it will be with Kirsten Mullen and William Darity Jr. And they're authors of From Here to Equality, Reparations for Black Americans in the 21st Century. And I'm certain that you will be seeing some promotional materials come through via email, however they get their word out to you. But the other thing is that they will be sending out a poll shortly after we officially close. And I invite all of you to please take a couple of minutes to complete the poll, because if this is something that you have enjoyed and that you've learned from, but you are still wanting more, or we did something really wrong tonight, we want to know about it. So please take the poll, and it also will be emailed out to you if you don't have a chance to complete it today. So on behalf of the Fort Lee Public Library, their board, the mayor, his council, everyone, our panelists, we thank you, audience, for joining us tonight. We did go a little bit over our 8:30 time limit, but I think it was 6 minutes well spent. And again, we appreciate everything, and we appreciate everything that Fort Lee is doing. So thank you, everyone, and good night.
Thank you. Great job, Jackie. Thank you. Thank you, panelists. An honor to be on here with you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Same here.
Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. God bless.
God bless.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Good night. Bye.
Right.